Dad looked me in the eye and said, "You're nothing but a disgrace." Then took my laptop. I quietly walked out. Now he wants to talk after what I did yesterday. I remember the way his fingers curled around it, like it belonged to him all along. It was the one thing I owned that felt mine, not just because I bought it with the money I earned bagging groceries and running freelance gigs in secret, but because it held everything I'd built when no one was watching. He grabbed it off my desk in the middle of another one of his tirades. I think this one started because I forgot to lock the garage, or maybe it was about the way I parked his truck in the driveway. It never really mattered. He just needed something to use, a crack to wedge the blade into. "You mooch off my house, my food, my name," he barked, practically spitting the words. "And for what?" "Sitting in here like some spoiled little brat, pretending you're busy on that screen." He called it, that screen, like it was some toy, like I was playing video games or watching cartoons. As if I hadn't spent the last 5 years teaching myself everything he refused to let me study. Marketing. Branding. SEO. Copywriting. I'd taken free online courses in secret, joined forums under fake usernames, built entire portfolios under aliases. All behind a locked door in a house that never felt like home. And when he took that laptop, I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just nodded. "Get your act together," he sneered. "Or get out of my house." I walked past him. Past the kitchen where my mother stood silent as a shadow, eyes on the tiled floor. Past the hallway lined with his plaques and photos. Businessman of the Year. A framed newspaper clipping from the 90s. A photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. His kingdom. His legacy. I was never in any of those frames. That night I left. No suitcase. No note. Just a hoodie, my phone, and what he couldn't see coming. He didn't know that for years, I'd been keeping receipts, not just invoices and spreadsheets, but voice memos and texts. Screenshots of NDA buyouts, audio of him threatening employees, files from burner emails. He didn't know I had admin access to every part of his legacy, because I built it. The website. The CRM. The lead generation system. I'd been the silent ghost propping up his empire under a pseudonym he thought was some consultant from Miami. He thought I was a disgrace. He had no idea I was the reason he was still in business. And yesterday, I made my move. It started with a tweet. Just a single sentence. "If you knew what really happened behind the walls of Wexler and Sons, you'd understand why the son walked away." I posted it from an anonymous account I built months earlier, with a carefully curated following of whistleblower advocates, labor rights activists, and a handful of journalists I'd been quietly feeding breadcrumbs to. The username was nothing special, just a name and numbers, but the links that followed? Those were gold. I didn't lead with the bombshell. I let it simmer. First, I posted a short thread, screenshots of emails from employees. Names redacted, of course. All detailing harassment, discrimination, threats of firing over medical absences. Then a few more posts, photos of pay stubs that didn't match hours worked. A scan of a settlement agreement for a former employee who was forced into silence with a low-ball NDA. And finally, audio. Clips of my father. Raging in his office. Screaming at a woman for ruining the client dinner because she'd requested to leave early for her child's school event. A voicemail he left a manager where he growled, "You're nothing but a cog. If you leave, I'll find another cheaper one." People ate it up. The thread went viral overnight. I watched it happen in real time, sitting in the back booth of a 24-hour diner 2 towns over, sipping burnt coffee while my phone buzzed with reposts, quote tweets, DMs from reporters, anonymous tips flooding in from people who had waited years for someone to speak up. They were brave, all of them. But no one wanted to be the first. That was always the rule in my dad's orbit: the first to speak loses the most. I'd already lost everything. Or so he thought. The next morning, #Wexler Exposed was trending. And the man who once strutted through local chambers of commerce like royalty? He was nowhere to be found. But I knew where he was. I knew he'd seen it. Because at 6:17 a.m., my phone lit up with a name I hadn't saved, but one I could never forget. Dad, we need to talk. Now. I didn't answer. Instead, I posted the final piece. A video. A recording, grainy but clear, of my father storming into my room 2 years ago, red-faced, jabbing a finger in my chest. You think you're smart? You're nothing without me. This house, this business, this family, you're a guest in all of it. And one day I'll prove it. As the video ended, I typed one last line beneath it. Turns out, the guest kept the lights on while the king slept. By mid-morning, it was everywhere. Local news picked it up first. Then the regional outlets. Then, somehow, one of the national finance blogs got a hold of it, with a brutal headline. Behind the curtain, the empire of Wexler and Sons is built on abuse, fraud, and a silenced son. I didn't even have to name him. Everyone already knew who the son was. Small-town royalty always knows when one of their own falls. I wasn't hiding anymore. I sat in my motel room, sunlight creeping through the cracks in the blinds, as I watched everything unfold on screen. A news anchor replayed my father's voicemail on live television, their voice heavy with disapproval. Former employees were now commenting, anonymously or not, sharing their own stories. The company's Yelp and Google pages were flooded. And then it happened. The sponsors pulled out. One by one. First the local construction firm. Then the car dealership. Then a national supplier, probably trying to get ahead of the storm. By noon, the company's website was down. My old login still worked, so I knew it hadn't been hacked. They took it down themselves. Damage control. A little too late. At 12:42 p.m., I got another text. From Mom, he's not himself. He hasn't said a word in hours. Can you please call? I stared at it for a long time. My mother, who'd stood behind him through every slammed door and insult, was now asking me for help. But that was always the story, wasn't it? I was supposed to be the quiet fixer. The one who absorbed it all, made it better, and never asked for anything in return. Not anymore. I turned off my phone and walked outside for the first time all day. The sun was blinding, the air crisp. For once, I could breathe without checking over my shoulder. That night, the news ran a full segment, 10 minutes long, with a timeline of lawsuits, shady business filings, and even a snippet from a podcast where an ex-client described how some ghost consultant had saved the company's online presence. He didn't know it was me. No one did. But I smiled. Because the ghost had finally stepped into the light. I didn't plan to answer when he called again. But I did. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe because I needed to hear how a man like him sounded when his world started to fall apart. When the armor cracked. The call came just after midnight. I was sitting on a bench outside the motel, hoodie pulled over my head, watching the parking lot light flicker. The screen lit up. Dad? I let it ring twice before answering. Yeah? Silence at first. Then a breath. Not a sigh, not a growl. Just a quiet, shaky inhale. Son! His voice broke around the word, like it tasted unfamiliar. We need to fix this. I didn't say anything. You don't understand what you've done. His voice tried to regain that familiar weight. That tone he used when he'd lecture me about responsibility, about carrying the family name. The business is collapsing. People are calling nonstop. There are news vans outside our house. Your mother is terrified. She didn't sound terrified when she watched you take my laptop, I said quietly. He didn't respond to that. Just let the silence stretch. You could have come to me, he said finally. We could have handled this privately. Like family. I almost laughed. You mean like when you told me I was a disgrace? When you ripped away the only thing I had right before I walked out that door? That was frustration, he said. You were disrespectful. You were always off in that room, doing who knows what, while I ran a business. I was running the business, I said flatly. That shut him up. I built your online lead funnel. The one you bragged about. I wrote the copy on your site. I set up your client retargeting emails. Every Wexler boost in revenues since 2019? That was me. That wasn't you. That was Nico Talbot Marketing? That was me. Every proposal, every invoice, every glowing testimonial you printed out and stuck on your office wall. That was all me. And you never once asked? I could hear him breathing. Shallow. Ragged. You lied, he said like it was the worst thing a man could do. I chuckled. I learned from the best. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, he asked, "What do you want?" I leaned back on the bench, watching a moth bump against the streetlight. "Nothing," I said. "I don't want anything from you." "Then why burn it all down?" "Because," I said, "I needed you to see what I've seen all my life. I needed the world to hear what you sound like when you're not playing king." He didn't speak again. I think he was crying. Or trying not to. I waited a moment, then hung up. That was the last time I answered his call. By the next morning, my inbox was full. Not just with reporters or bloggers chasing a scoop, though there were plenty of those. But with people like me. Sons. Daughters. Employees. Quiet partners. People who'd been steamrolled by men who believed control was the same thing as love, and that legacy was something you could shout into existence. They told me things. About my father. About the side deals, the under-the-table contracts. About the women he'd threatened into silence. One of them, a former intern named Valerie, sent me a Dropbox folder. Recordings. Emails. Photos. Things that would make the lawsuit already forming look like a warm-up. I didn't go looking for revenge. I want to be clear about that. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. Years of being gaslit, belittled, dismissed, it makes you doubt your own reality. I'd started to think maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was the disgrace he said I was. But now the world saw it too. And it wasn't just mine anymore. This was collective truth. And once it surfaced, it spread. I got an email from the Department of Labor that same afternoon, asking if I'd be willing to speak to someone about the allegations. Then a voicemail from an attorney I'd never met, representing one of the former clients I'd pitched under my alias. He wanted to verify that I was, in fact, the person behind Nico Talbot. I confirmed it. Then he said something I hadn't expected. You probably saved that company. We were about to pull out." I didn't know what to say to that. All I remember was staring out the motel window, looking at nothing in particular, feeling like I'd finally stepped into my own name. Because he might have built the shell. But I built the bones. And now, it was clear, I didn't need his approval. I never had. 3 days after the exposé went viral, he showed up. Not at the motel. I'd already left by then. I was staying in a small Airbnb outside of town, booked under one of my alias accounts. It had no TV, no neighbors within shouting distance, and a view of the woods from the back porch that made it feel like I was finally living on a different planet. But that didn't stop him. I was standing in the kitchen, brewing coffee, when I saw the shadow through the frosted window of the front door. The knock that followed was soft. Almost uncertain. Not his usual style. I opened it anyway. He looked smaller. Like the air had been let out of him. Same old pressed button-down shirt, only now it hung off his frame like it didn't quite fit. The man who used to walk through his offices like he owned the ground under his feet was just standing there. Clutching something. It was my laptop. The same one he'd taken from me like it was some childish toy. The one I had already written off. I thought you might want this, he said. I didn't take it. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe. Why are you really here? He looked down at the laptop. Then back up. To talk. To fix this if we can. I let out a slow breath. Not angry. Not mocking. Just tired. You're not here to fix anything. You're here because you finally realized the Empire isn't bulletproof. He flinched like I'd struck him. It wasn't supposed to go this far. No, I said. It wasn't supposed to go public. There's a difference. He stood there for a long time, laptop in hand, like he thought if he held it long enough, maybe we'd go back in time. to when I was just the quiet son, grateful for scraps, never asking for more than a nod of approval. But I wasn't that kid anymore. He didn't realize he'd already lost me a long time ago. You know, I said finally, I used to dream about this moment. You showing up. Apologizing. Asking for a second chance. His eyes lit up, like he thought he had a way in. But then I realized, I continued, that dream only existed because I didn't know what freedom felt like. He lowered the laptop slightly. I can change. I don't need you to. I said. I don't want you to. I want you to face what you built. That's your legacy now, not me. The wind picked up behind him. The woods rustled. He looked lost for a second, like he couldn't decide whether to plead or lash out. So I did it for him. I'm not coming back, Dad. And I'm not fixing this for you. Then I closed the door. Not slammed. Just closed. Soft. Final. I thought that would be the end of it, the quiet closing of a door, a clean break. But people like my father don't let go of ghosts that easily. The next day, I got a notification. One of the old back-end dashboards I built under his company's name had a login attempt. Not from me. From him. He was trying to get into the system I designed. The funny part? He never knew how it worked. He'd bragged about his digital strategy, boasted at chamber meetings about analytics and engagement metrics, but it was always me. I'd built it all, from the code to the copy. And I'd protected it too. So I watched, from my new account, as he failed 5 login attempts in a row. Then, at 6:01 p.m., I got an email. Subject, please. From Richard Wexler. To Nico Talbot. He was reaching out to the alias. The ghost. My other name. I clicked it open. I know now. I know it was you. You were behind everything good. I see that now. I'm sorry. Please help me fix this. That was the part that broke me a little, not the apology, but the timing of it. He didn't apologize when he took my laptop. Not when he called me a disgrace. Not when he erased me from the business like I was a smudge on a clean mirror. But now, when the walls were crumbling? Now, he was sorry. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words. But because I finally did. And I was choosing silence. Let the empire fall. Let the ghost disappear. 2 weeks after the exposé, the lawsuits began. 3 former employees filed claims, 1 for unpaid wages, 2 for harassment. The Department of Labor opened an investigation. A local reporter reached out for an on-camera interview, which I declined, but I did give her a quote. The truth was never buried. It was just ignored by the people who benefited from the silence. She ran that line as the headline. I heard from an old family friend that the office had gone dark. Shutters drawn. Sign taken down. My father wasn't showing up anymore. One day, he locked the doors at 2 p.m. and never came back. The building sat empty for a while. Dust collecting on glass. Phones still ringing. But here's the twist, the business didn't die. Not really. A few of the former employees, ones I had quietly coached over the years, banded together. They formed a new agency. Leaner. Honest. And they used the same infrastructure I had built under my ghost name. They called it Talbot Collective. They even reached out to me, offering a role. Said I could lead the digital division, finally attach my real name to my own work. It was tempting. But I wasn't sure. I'd spent so long in the shadows I wasn't sure if I wanted the spotlight. Still, I told them I'd think about it. I wasn't rebuilding for revenge. I was rebuilding for me. Because for the first time in my life, the weight was gone. The quiet pressure of his expectations, the manipulations disguised as fatherhood, the constant need to prove myself, it was all ashes now. And from that, something better was starting to grow. I didn't realize how heavy it had all been until I stepped outside of it. You think you're just tired. Worn down. Maybe burned out. But then you wake up one morning in a place with no echoes, no footsteps stomping down a hallway, no voice behind a closed door rehearsing authority like a script, no tension lingering in the air like secondhand smoke, and you realize. Oh. That was suffocation. Freedom didn't come with a drumroll or confetti. It came in small things. The first time I opened my laptop and didn't flinch. The first time I posted under my real name, and attached it to work I was proud of. The first time a client wrote back and said, "You really helped us grow." And I didn't have to send that credit up the ladder to someone who would accept it with a smile and a lie. I started saying yes to things. Not out of fear or guilt, but curiosity. A podcast wanted to feature me anonymously, talk about silent labor, about building in the shadows. I agreed. My voice disguised, name omitted. But still, something in me healed with every word I spoke aloud. I told them the truth. That I spent years building someone else's kingdom. That I wasn't just the son of a tyrant. I was the architect of a machine he didn't know how to operate. And that when I left, I didn't destroy it. I revealed it. But the real change? It wasn't external. It was in how I saw myself. I stopped apologizing for how I worked. I stopped shrinking to fit into the blueprint my father had drawn, one that required obedience, silence, and self-erasure. I stopped measuring my worth by his approval. And the more I stepped into my own space, the more I realized. I wasn't alone. There were others like me. Quiet sons. Daughters. Wives. Partners. Employees. People who'd spent their lives folding themselves smaller, contorting to survive in the orbit of someone who believed love and loyalty were owed, not earned. They messaged me. One woman wrote, "You made me realize I wasn't weak for staying quiet. I was surviving. But now I'm ready to speak." We were survivors, not cowards. And now we were building something new. Something better. In the quiet after the storm, I learned that freedom isn't a destination, it's a way of living. I walked away from a legacy built on control and neglect, and with each step, I reclaimed the pieces of myself that had been hidden away. I found purpose in creating something real, something that honored every sacrifice without demanding guilt in return. Now, as I lead the Talbot Collective, I no longer hide behind a pseudonym. I share my story, not as revenge, but as a reminder, your voice matters. Stand tall, even when the world tells you to shrink. Every ending opens the door to a new beginning, and sometimes, that door is the only way out of the past.